my experience has been in multiple sport domains that it requires an excessive effort. People who tell me that, a champion can live a balanced life, they've never been around a champion athlete. There's no such thing as a balanced life for a champion athlete. They can be more balanced than less in some respects, but there's going to be imbalance, and it's going to be tremendously unbalanced if you're talking about something like professional cycling, where it is not just go to the gym and work out or go to practice for 3 or 4 hours. It's a full lifestyle commitment, literally 24 hours a day.
This is Andrew Vontz, and you're listening to Choose the Hard Way, the show about how hard things build stronger humans who have more fun, humans like you. Special thanks to our title sponsor, Blockchain.com, the most trusted name in crypto, with over $1 trillion in transactions to date. Go to blockchain.com to get started on your crypto journey. Today, I'm joined by Jeff Troesch, one of the most experienced mental performance coaches in the world. For nearly 4 decades, Jeff's worked with winners of events like the Super Bowl, the World Series, winners of all 4 Grand Slams, Olympians, top-level college athletes, and elite performers across numerous sports and the boardroom as well. Jeff's the author of One Day Better. It's a practical guide to the strategies and tactics Jeff has proven over the course of his career. You can learn more at 80/20 Books on Instagram. You can find that link in the show notes. I've really enjoyed reading the book. I've kind of taken a chapter a day approach. They're short, digestible chapters, highly actionable information, and Jeff's book has given me practical ideas that I'm already using in my practice. As you may know, high performance and behavioral science are core to the work I do through One Real Voice. That's my consultancy where I work with select industry leaders to help them master the art of open-ended, dynamic communication for conversational formats like podcasts, town halls, fireside chats, in any context, internal or external, where it's a dynamic and open-ended conversation, because these are now the formats where reputations are made and business is won. I'm currently at capacity with One Real Voice, but if you'd like to learn more, you can DM me at HardwayPod or email hello@onerealvoice.com. Please subscribe to this show wherever you listen and become a paid subscriber of my Substack at alwaysthehardway.substack.com. That's the number way to support this work and help me bring you more episodes. And I did want to tell you that when I ride bikes, I ride Lauf because they're elegant products, they're fun to ride, and you can check them out at laufcycles.com. I've got big news coming soon about the Adult Contemporary Gravel Shakeout Ride World Tour 2026. You can follow me on Instagram at HardwayPod to learn more about that. But right now, let's dive into this conversation with Jeff.
I love the hard puzzle and working alongside someone to help solve, how do they crack the code on whatever is available to them from a resource perspective, and then how to create efficiencies around that. It sort of fits my personality. It fits my, it's fun. It's literally like a game to me. And I don't mean that in any sort of, insulting or condescending way towards the clients with whom I work and have worked. But it's like every person presents this interesting opportunity to take them from where they are to where they want to be. And then again, how do we create efficiencies there? And how do we find, the habits and the skill build that helps guide them towards that? And I just find it, frankly, I find it fascinating. I'm approaching my 40th year doing this for a living, and I say with real honesty, at the risk of it sounding like exaggeration, that I have never had a day of work that I didn't like. Every single day, there's something in the day, and often many things in the day, that just fuel me, because it's just exciting to work along people, going from wherever they are to where they want to go. It doesn't have to be somebody aspiring to be one in the world or retain their one in the world status. For me, I don't care if it's a 12-year-old trying to figure out how to crack the code on the high school team in a few years. It doesn't matter to me. So I just like people who are motivated to improve and work alongside them.
What's the most complex skill gap that you've had to help someone bridge?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. if we're talking about behavior, like internal skill gap, for me, I think a lot of people, myself included, I think we all have a tendency to tell ourselves things, create narratives in our head. And I think for a lot of people, it's very difficult to access an alternative reality, an alternative narrative, something that may be more objectively and factually accurate. I think many of us really hold on with sort of claws in the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves and about our life or about our circumstance. And I think for a lot of people, it's very challenging. I think the introduction of the concept is pretty easy to understand for people, but I feel like then really being willing to do the work of deep self-awareness to change the narrative can be among the more difficult things to do for most people of any age, frankly.
It's been interesting for me in my consulting practice, One Real Voice, where I'm working with some of the most senior executives and highest performers in the world. And in parallel, in my practice as a Zen Buddhist, something that the Buddha said is, just to be reductive, the stories that we tell ourselves are what we become.
Yeah.
And to the point that you make, self-talk plays such a critical role, I mean, in every aspect of our life and our emotional complexion, and certainly in the domain of high performance. How do you help people take the brakes off and change that story? Because as you noted, that can be one of the most difficult things to do.
Yeah, it's going to sound overly simplistic, and every athlete, every person that's in front of me, we have a unique pathway towards them finding their own personal understanding and being able to apply it. But I would say in general, I start from the basic premise of like counseling 101 of, is what you're doing working for you? And if we start at that place, nearly everyone says no, not to the degree that they would like it to. And so then it becomes more of like, okay, well, what sorts of things are foundationally supporting your old narrative? What things are foundationally supporting the ways that you've been doing things, the way that you have been doing them? And basically just not ever telling somebody what they should be thinking or the right way to think or whatever. But I think it's helping people explore alternative ways to look at themselves, look at their circumstance, look at their life. It actually then becomes sort of an intriguing space of curiosity and discovery and exploration. I feel like what I do, frankly, well is help provide an environment where people do self-exploration and self-discovery and really foster curiosity rather than trying to be right about it. It's, the old adage about rather than trying to be right, it's about get it right. And for them to understand what's right for them. So it's sort of I go in with sort of a soft, I'm a relatively direct coach and a straightforward coach in early days as it relates to helping people sort of soften that notion of self-exploration. I think it's important to go in a little soft and to go in a little, tiptoe in and guide them into a space where they're willing to do that exploration and they're willing to go through that discovery process. And then it becomes a mutuality of like, try this on. What do you think about this? Is there an alternative way to look at things? Again, sort of self-talk 101 stuff that most of us know that are in this domain. But doing it in a way, it's sort of the art of this is to guide them in a way that for that person gets sticky and doesn't feel threatening, but feels beneficial.
To go full gas in any discipline, and certainly in professional sports, requires a tremendous degree of self-confidence, equally as you've noted. In order to continue to progress towards mastery, it in equal measure requires a high degree of self-awareness, introspection, and the capacity to ask and answer questions that lead to change and transformation. And you mentioned one of these questions, which is this working for you? At the outset, what other questions do you like to ask someone to start to lead them down this path to change?
Yeah, I actually have a little form that I have them fill out, a little assessment form, and it essentially asks them to rate themselves on a 1 to 10 basis about what sorts of areas are areas of concern for them, and then generally that begins the process of us sort of navigating down the pathway of which of these areas. Is it about focus? Is it about confidence? Is it about self-worth? Is it about comparative challenges? There are a number of areas that this little assessment that I put together helps guide us towards. And ultimately, I want to know where they want to go, and ultimately, what is really valuable is for them to get clarity about why they want to go there. And for a lot of people, it's been fascinating to me, again, in my career, having been around some of the absolute best in the world in multiple sports. It's interesting to me the different answers to the question of why. I want to be number one in the world. Why? Or I want to, whatever it is, I want a PR. I want to be the club champion. I want to be the whatever. It's like helping people dig deeply into their why, because oftentimes the layers underneath their first response are things that are a little unavailable to them. They haven't perhaps done the deeper dive on that. And I think sustaining awareness of what that why is really helps people have the resilience and the persistence that's necessary to take themselves to the next levels, because a lot of times the surface why seems to be satisfied, but there are areas underneath it that are more profound and more important to them.
In terms of the language that you use and the way that you introduce concepts, what is your method in terms of giving people enough information that they can begin to move towards change without overloading them or creating a high degree of cognitive load that it's not going to be possible for them to process?
Yeah, I laugh at myself a lot, because I start out with so many sessions. Initially, my initial session with people talking about the fact that I don't do brain surgery. What I teach is not super complicated. I remember feeling insulted for the first 20 years of my career when people would say, "Oh, this is a lot of common sense," and I would sort of recoil at that, because it felt insulting to me. And now I appreciate that really the principles that we're talking about are relatively rudimentary concepts. It's just a matter of helping people create enough awareness and then enough discipline and application to take advantage of what is common sense, or take advantage of what might work for them. So in the early sessions and in the introductory phase of what I'm doing, I have a few models from which I work that are very basic, and I like to keep it reasonably simplistic out of the gate. Not to be patronizing, but more to get a little stickiness out of the gate about like an understanding about how our thoughts affect our emotions and how those feelings can influence behavior, and helping people work backwards and forwards in that very simple model as an example to help guide them towards an examination of what their thoughts are that are influencing whatever their emotions might be. So it's relatively simple language, and it's the feedback that I get consistently is like, "Oh yeah, that really makes sense. I haven't really thought about it that way." Not like it's any huge epiphany, or not like it's like secret sauce necessarily, but I think I don't necessarily like to use the phrase, but sort of dumb it down enough that I think anybody can get it. Literally, a 10-year-old kid can get it, and so can somebody who's at the peak of their tip of the spear in their sport. So I like to keep it simple. I like to keep it rudimentary, and then sort of massage from there into the areas that of more complexity.
And in those initial sessions, when you're working with, let's say you're working with an Olympian, professional athlete who's at the very top of their sport, and maybe you have examples you'd be open to sharing, are they typically bought into this process, or does something have to happen where there's this transubstantiation to get them to have faith in you and this process that they're beginning?
Great question. And at the risk of sounding evasive with probably every answer I give you, it depends, right? It's like there's this huge spectrum of clients that come to come into my practice. I mean, I don't have a website. I don't have a way to find me really. So everything I've done for almost 4 decades has been word of mouth. So a lot of times the athletes that come to me through some sort of endorsement from another athlete or a coach or something along those lines. So there's initial street cred when they come on board. Then it becomes how many are psychologically sophisticated, how many are really willing to do that deeper work, how many are looking for a tip. I tell people, like, I don't do the tip jar. I'm not gonna drop tips in, and that's not what I do. Like, it's deep learning, awareness, application, habit building. And I will say, for some, anything related to the psychological domain just scares the shit out of them, because they feel threatened, in some respect. And I have to go a long way to help them appreciate that what I do is not therapy. And for a lot of people, making the distinction between what somebody like myself, what I do, and what a therapist might do, that distinction is very gray or very blurred. And for some athletes, that's very scary, because they don't want that process for whatever their reasons might be, which I respect. Some come to the table extraordinarily excited about the idea that they can be better, from a mental perspective than they have been. And, for those athletes who come on board and they are just hungry to build skills in this domain, those are very interesting, and no more successful or unsuccessful than other athlete interactions. But I would say, like, right out of the gate, you get the really motivated, really receptive, like open-minded, I just want to get better at this skill. Those folks, I don't say out of the gate, are a little easier to deal with. But I would say there are a fair percentage of, I would say, probably more than 50% of the clients that come in initially, they come in from a place of some sort of pain point. It's very few people seek somebody like myself from a place of, like, wellness visits. I speak to the fact, like, you don't have to be sick to get better. And once the athletes with whom I work are starting to roll, then they see the benefit of continuing to build skills. But oftentimes they're coming in because there's been some inflection point in their career or in their training or in their relationships within their career. And then it becomes like, something's wrong. Can you help me fix it? And, again, another of the things I talk about is, like, I can help guide you there, but I'm really more of a build it guy than a fix it guy. We can maybe band-aid whatever's going on in the short term, but let's build skills to help you more proactively and ultimately reactively in whatever that situation might be. So that's, sort of across the spectrum of the people that I deal with.
You've written an entire book about this, obviously, which I highly recommend. I've enjoyed reading it, and I think anyone listening to this podcast will enjoy reading it as well. As you think about this continuum of skills that, again, as you noted, every person you're working with is an individual, and part of what you're doing is building custom solutions to help them create the outcomes given their psychology, their abilities. In general, what do you see as the foundation as moving down this path? Is there any common denominator that you need people to have just to get started with this work?
I think anybody can get started with it. I feel like the sort of the mentioned earlier, like the deeper rooted layers that are under self-awareness or that are under self-confidence. I mean, some people have the unfortunate circumstance of growing up in family systems or in environments where their primary self-worth is damaged, or has been influenced negatively. And so, occasionally we'll get some folks that with whatever self-awareness they might have, there's like a deeper rooted shame or trauma or something along those lines that influences their day-to-day activity. So, sometimes it requires going into that sort of deeper mode. And in some cases, certainly I'll refer out to a clinical psychologist or someone along those lines to help people get more foundationally stable relative to those sorts of things. So I think at a minimum, people coming in, honestly, for me, it's like, are they coming in with curiosity? Are they coming in with open-mindedness and curiosity and a willingness to do the work? Because I see myself as a strength and conditioning coach is how I frame it. Like, I can show you how to do a great deadlift or how to do squats properly, but it actually means getting your ass in the gym and doing it consistently so that you can put those things into your sport domain under duress. And I think a lot of people initially come in with the notion that they're going to have some sort of tip that's going to crack the code on something for them. And what my first clue often is when people show up to their first session, whether they have a notebook with them or they don't. And so if somebody shows up with no way to take notes and nothing, then I know that and it's okay. They don't get it yet, that this is going to be, there's going to be a lot here. I'm going to be dumping a lot of information, and it's going to require them to be more intentional in their application of these things, and not just, let me get a slogan I can put on my t-shirt, and that's going to take me to the promised land. So open-mindedness, some sort of foundational stability around like who they are from as a person, and irrespective of their identity as an athlete or as a coach or as a CEO. And I think if we can have an open-mindedness and that sort of stability, then we can do good work.
How do you think about the dichotomy that high performers tend to represent, where on the one hand, it really requires an obsessive attention to detail, an ability to push yourself into spaces and places that de facto just the average person is not going to go, because
right.
To be exceptional, you do have to do exceptional things.
Yes.
And then at the other end of this continuum, I think about what I've observed in the past 30 years in my career, where having low neuroticism is one of the gifts that I see over and over again with the people who are the very best at what they do. It's not always context agnostic, right? It does tend to be in one domain.
Yes.
Do you think of low neuroticism as something that can be trainable for someone?
I maybe have a naive. I don't see myself as a naive person, but I don't know if it's ego or naivety or whatever it is. I feel like almost anything can be trainable. I feel as though if somebody's willing to do the work and they're alongside the process that can guide them there, I think again, if we're continuing to come back to like, does this work? What are the alternatives? What are the options available to you? I think people sort of pushing into whatever domain we're talking about, whether it be around neuroticism or whatever else, pick any domain. I feel as though I'm not a believer that the old, leopard can't change its spots thing or whatever. I mean, I've seen athletes, I've spoken with CEOs, I've had, clients who are, long in the tooth, who have made significant changes in their behavior, significant changes in their perception of the world, because they've done the work with an open-mindedness, back to the curiosity thing, and a willingness to flex. I feel like when pushed, I would say that the in addition to curiosity, the one really common denominator that I see is adaptability in the highest performers. And so to your specific point, if somebody is willing to adapt and flex even in something like neuroticism, then there's a likelihood that they can. Now, will they? I mean, that's always up in the air. That's, does it actually get traction and ultimately fit? But I feel like anybody coming in with an open mind, willing to flex, willing to be adaptable, the best athletes in the world aren't necessarily the strongest or the fastest. For me, sure, there's a lot of that, but there's a lot of adaptability. There's a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of flexing to accommodate what the environment requires. And upon deeper examination, I feel as though almost any domain you throw in front of me is trainable or can be influenced.
To put that in a real world context, could you give an example of an athlete or an executive, any type of client who
Sure.
has had to flex into some area where, as you noted, they have curiosity, they believe that this is something they need to do, yet it's probably highly uncomfortable?
Yeah. Well, the first one that pops into my mind, I was approached a few years ago by, I don't talk about who I work with, so I got to be careful with my language here just to be protective. But this person approached me, had won an Olympic gold medal in the previous games, and was really struggling with all that came with what happens when one wins a gold medal, and then the approaching Olympiad that was coming forward. And part of what was challenging was flexing off of what had worked in the lead up to that gold medal, was not feeling like it was working along the way, and in terms of training regimen, in terms of coach relationship, in terms of levels of commitment to the sport, things were sort of waxing and waning. This person approached with looking for a tip, looking for like, how can I, what can you tell me that'll crack the code so I can be that person again? And so it took a while to get this person to be willing to look deeply into some of the decisions, some of the choices, some of the habits that had actually changed. Like the perception was like what I am doing now isn't working like it was before. And there was some blind spot around the fact that you actually aren't doing things the way that you were before. You're sort of bullshitting yourself into thinking that you're doing the same things. But if we really do a deeper examination, it's not even close. Like, again, the level of commitment, the sort of interactions you're having, the all in sort of, putting it all on the table as you did for the previous Olympiad. So that's one that strikes me. And it took this person a while to, frankly, there was some real resistance initially. It was sort of like, no, and sort of trying to blow off that because it couldn't conceivably be that that's what it was. And I think a fair amount of that, frankly, and this is, another big tangent we could go off on, is a, very ego-driven sort of approach to this person's sport after having won the gold medal. And I think what had fueled previously was sort of diminished because there were so many people around this person telling them how fucking awesome they were, and they started to believe it. And so the ego got involved, and there were deficiencies in the preparation. So once there was a deeper open-mindedness and more, I think, honest exploration on this person's part, basically sort of guilty as charged, and made those adjustments, and it turned out very nicely in the next Olympiad, which it hadn't been turning out very nicely in the couple of years leading up to it. So that was a satisfying one, but a challenging one to deal with, frankly.
Something that reading your book, Jeff, made me reflect upon was a story that Corey Richards shared on this podcast. Corey, very famous and accomplished alpinist, climbed Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen, National Geographic explorer, world-class photographer, and it's been through a lot of ups and downs in his career and with some mental health adventures as well. And he shared something that someone else had said to him. So I'm quoting somebody, but Corey talked about how people often think in life, because they have an outcome orientation, they're thinking about the outcome goal. If I just climb the ladder and I get to the top of the ladder, I'm going to get to the magic box, then everything's going to change when I get outcome X, and all my problems will be solved. My ego challenges, my trauma, it's just like a magic wand. And as Corey shared, there's nothing in the box. And that's what a lot of people discover, whether they're summiting Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen, they're getting that promotion to run an international corporation as CEO, they're winning an Olympic gold medal. And something that I've been reflecting on, and again, this surfaced for me as I was reading your book, I actually believe that process goals are not just the most important goals. They're perhaps the only goals that we should have, because they're all that we can control. And I do think you need a center of gravity to move towards, such as an Olympic gold medal, a promotion. Maybe it's getting a certain placing in your amateur bike race next summer, whatever the case may be. How do you get these incredibly talented people who necessarily have to have high egos because they're going to go do exceptional world-class things? How do you keep them focused on the process as they're moving through this?
Yeah, great question. First of all, what you're talking about is like the achievement myth of when I get this, then X will occur in my life. And, having been alongside a lot of people who have achieved very, very high things, great things, outwardly, the pinnacles of whatever they're doing. They get the VC round, they get the, whatever it is. There's all these things, right? And the medals in the world championships and all that. And how many times, and it's nearly every time, it's sort of like, yeah. And then the next day I was like, now what the hell do I do? Or like looking like, so what? Once the hangover's done, then it's sort of like who gives a shit? So the process piece is, there's so much discussion now in the sport, particularly we're talking about sport domain. There's so much discussion around process goals versus outcome goals that most athletes with whom I interface have had some exposure to that construct. So it's an easy one to speak to. I think the way that I like to frame it, and it's I speak to it in my book, is a couple different things. One is the distinction between awareness and attention. That being aware of what that North Star or that lighthouse or that the gold medal or the promotion that you want, being aware that that's where you want to go, I think can be really helpful. It can be motivational. It can be inspiring, clearly. However, if you put too much attention on that, then we take our attention away from the daily work necessary to give us our best chance to get what we really want. And I think intellectually, like nearly every athlete that I work with really gets that intellectually. They understand, and because most of them have done the work, they've layered the 365 commitment to their craft, and so they understand sort of what it takes to put themselves in a position to get what they really want. I would also say that more and more athletes are becoming more aware of and willing to speak to, at least with me, they're willing to speak to the anxiety and the stress that comes from the outcome goals. So it's not just so like, oh yeah, there's this thing that I'm chasing. It's sort of like, I'm not there yet. And, and what's wrong with me? And so a lot of times those sorts of outcome goals are framed in like the gap between where they are and where they feel like they want to be or they should be or they need to be. And so it becomes, I don't know if it's easy is the right word, but it becomes relatively easy to help athletes explore the how that can be distracting and how that can be non-productive as it relates to us moving towards mastery, and then really helping them put their attention on clarity around like, okay, what are you going to do today to advance you in that direction so that you can move towards what you really want, with an understanding that it's the self-satisfaction of doing, per the name of your podcast, it's like doing hard things on the daily. You start layering those things on a day-to-day basis, and that's the basis for joy. That's the basis for self-satisfaction. That's the basis for sort of really deeply connecting with what your craft is, not necessarily just grabbing that gold medal or grabbing the top of the podium. While certainly that feels great, and when people aspire to that and get that, it's a wonderful moment. But if that's all that it's about, and that's what it's, in sum, that's what it's about for that athlete, there's a psychological crash afterwards for nearly all of them.
Is professional cycling has become, paradoxically, for something that's a professional sport, increasingly professionalized, and we've seen really this acceleration in the last 6 years in particular. Nutrition has kind of taken this quantum leap. Other areas of high performance, aerodynamics, equipment preparation, altitude training, heat training. I have someone coming on the podcast in about a month to talk about their book that's about heat specifically. It's become a more totalizing commitment. And what we've seen at the highest level of the sport, we have athletes like Simon Yates, Grand Tour winner in 2025, just announced about a week ago. He's leaving the sport. There's some speculation as to why he is leaving, but the discussion happening now is the totalizing commitment it requires to be a professional cyclist, where all professional sports require a pretty totalizing commitment. Yeah. Equally, those guys in the World Tour, they're on the road probably 300 days a year.
Yes.
And a lot of that time is spent in hotels with their teammates. They're doing altitude camps, sometimes for up to 6-8 weeks now. Yeah. They're living on a volcano. And the nutrition component as well, where you're weighing and measuring every gram of everything that you're consuming when you're on the bike, you're just force feeding yourself carb slurry basically to ingest as much as possible. And it's starting to fry people. At the same time, I have Jens Vogt, who came up through the Eastern Bloc system in the late 80s. And that whole system was predicated on, as you know, hey, we're going to put millions, hundreds of thousands of youth athletes into this. And at the other end, we're going to destroy a lot of people's bodies. And at the other end of this, we're going to have 3 people who could bear the load and they could keep going. I bring this up because what I'm observing in professional cycling now is there is some subset of people for whom this process of obsessive, totalizing, always on preparation works. The psychological and relational profile that I've observed is they tend to not be married. They tend to not have children because that becomes, I think, psychologically distracting for athletes at that level of the sport.
Yep.
And they just love kind of, I'm a science experiment, not with doping, but with just, I'm controlling all of these inputs. And if I do all of this for an extremely long period of time, because to be a Grand Tour winner, generally, unless you're Tadej Pogačar, we're talking about at least 10 years of nose to the coalface, swinging the axe perfectly every repetition until suddenly you're Matteo Jorgensen, who is on Simon Yates's team, has always wanted to have a shot at a Grand Tour. Simon Yates steps aside last week. Well, guess what? Now he's going to get a shot, right?
Yeah.
I've
worked with professional cyclists, but it's not my number one area of expertise. But what the emotion that hits me is sadness in what you're saying, because it's on the one hand, appreciate for those for whom they want to make that 10-year commitment and they want to go all in on it. And, certainly I have no judgment around that. People can live their lives however they want to. But to your point of like back in the 80s, I think so many people get thrown into the meat grinder and just, what comes out at the end are the, half dozen people that they then are used as examples for the next generation of people. Like, this is what it takes in order for you to get here. And while that may be true, we rarely talk about like how many people get blown up in the process and basically have either put their lives on hold or have really gone sideways in areas of their life that for them, were destructive. And so, it is this interesting paradox because on the one hand, I would agree with you. My experience has been in multiple sport domains that it requires an excessive effort. People who tell me that, a champion can live a balanced life. They've never been around a champion athlete. There's no such thing as a balanced life for a champion athlete. They can be more balanced than less in some respects, but there's going to be imbalance, and it's going to be tremendously unbalanced if you're talking about something like professional cycling, where it is not just go to the gym and work out or go to practice for 3 or 4 hours. It's a full lifestyle commitment, literally 24 hours a day, because you're also talking about sleep quality and it's never switched off, right? So back to what I was saying in the beginning of this podcast, it's why for me digging into a person's why is so important. Like, why are you doing this? And I don't mean that again in any sort of judgment. Like, I want to be a professional cyclist. Like, why? Why the hell would you want to do that? That's not the why question. It's like, why are you nuts? But it's like really, really helping people flesh out. I mean, it's a little bit for me like there's a naivety in it. There's an ignorance around it about for a lot of people when they start down this pathway of really, people can't really deeply understand what it is until they're actually in the middle of it. We can talk all the time about how freaking hard it is and about the commitment to it and the sacrifices and the investments and all that. But until you're actually living it, like with anything, you don't really know it till you actually live it. But the more, to me, that we can help them explore, what their deeper why is, then for me, I can help. For those who have a why that feels reasonably healthy to me and they have a fair sense of what it's going to cost them, I think they go in more with their eyes wide open. And I think they go in with a understanding like, yeah, I'm willing to I am truly willing to do what it takes to sacrifice, the 3, 4, 10 years of my life on a dedicated basis in order to give myself a chance to do this for whatever these reasons might be for me. I think for a lot of people, there's the naivety. It's a little bit, the analogy that I use is like talking to a little kid, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And, I want to be a spaceman, or I want to be a whatever. They don't know what the hell that means to go from here to there. And I think sometimes people get intoxicated by the notion of being a world champion at something, or whatever their aspirations are, without really, really understanding what sort of sacrifices and what sort of investment that requires, and ultimately what you give up in order to get what you say is your primary focal point. So it's a hard conversation to have, frankly, with a lot of athletes, because a lot of them are just hell bent on being the best, and oftentimes it requires, most people require some pain before they're actually willing to make change, and so oftentimes we'll have those conversations proactively or preliminarily. They'll continue down that path, and then they'll start suffering the consequences for the life choices that they're making, and then that becomes an area of opportunity for me to really dig in more to make sure that they're going down a healthy path and don't ultimately blow up. From a mental health perspective, as you said, you got the cyclists out. We have, across all sport domains, we have athletes who are bouncing on their careers near the peak of their careers, and they're in their mid-20s, late 20s, and they have a lot more runway, but they're just over it because they're burned out. You're seeing that way more than we did 20, 25 years ago, for sure.
What do you believe are the characteristics of an effective coach?
Oh, effective coach. First thing that strikes me is somebody that is willing to ask a lot of questions. I think a great coach asks more questions than gives answers. I think in 2026 and going forward, I think the more collaborative a coach is, I think that I think in the 1980s, being a collaborative coach, I don't even know if there was a collaborative coach in the 1980s, but nowadays, athletes have access to a lot of information. They have access to a lot of different avenues to get data and input, and I feel like working alongside coaches, and coaches being willing to work alongside athletes rather than always sort of the authoritarian top-down. I feel like both coach and athlete working collaboratively to guide that process. I believe that's a big piece of it. The just a general statement of being a great communicator, but what does being a great communicator mean? And I could go like way into the rabbit hole on that in my coaching development stuff when I'm working with coaches. But being a good listener, making sure that we're not assuming intention based on observed behavior, which is one of the things I see coaches do a lot, which is one of the first things that I'm jumping on coaches about.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah. So I'll use an example. I'll use a real example from just this week. So I'm consulting with a basketball program, and we're on the sidelines, and one of the players was not running up the court as fast as that player might normally run up the court. And the one coach turned to the other coach and said, that one's checked out today. And the coach said, yeah, probably for whatever reason, he doesn't give a shit. Like, he's taking the day off. And, what I said to those coaches is like, hang on a minute. Are there other possibilities about why that one trip up the court may have happened in that fashion? Is it possible he sprained an ankle? He's fatigued. He got confused. And they're sort of looking at me quizzically like, well, yeah, I suppose that could be the case. So I said, and we've talked about this domain before. I said, that's an example of what we've talked about. You're observing behavior and you're making an assumption about that behavior. And now you're going to coach that athlete from that place of, oh, he's checked out today, or he doesn't give a shit. And it may be true, possibly, right? But there are 10 other reasons for why that might. How about if we speak to the observed behavior and let the athlete speak to it? So we're working together to help that athlete identify, like, it's not acceptable to go 80% up the court unless that's 100% of what you got right now because you got a sore ankle or whatever, right? So that's an example of oftentimes we all do this. It's not just coaches with athletes. We do this in our relationships and all. our spouse does something and we assume some sort of intent, and that blows up in the kitchen or whatever. Like
that never happens.
Yeah. No, maybe not with yours, but so I mean, it's normal and non-productive and unhelpful, but I think it can be really valuable for a coach. And obviously the reverse works as well. Like sometimes athletes will assume a coach's intent. Oh, that the coach spent more time talking to her than he did to me, so that must mean this. So we start making a story up and making inferences about observed behavior, which may have nothing to do with reality. Now we go down that rabbit hole. We start acting upon it as if it's true.
That's part of what's so interesting about is within a team sport context, or if you look at an executive team, for example, the individual needs to maximize their performance. They genuinely must be a team player.
Right.
And equally, everyone is competing for a limited pool of money, and there's always the possibility of transfer, whether that's to another employer, a higher paying team, and it becomes this form of co-opetition within the team, unfortunately, often, yet you also have external opponents. It's just such a complex situation with so many asymmetries of power as well, right?
Yeah, that's well stated. Yeah, and there's a sports psych that's doing some really good work out there named Brett Leadbetter. He has some videos that he posts, and one of the things I show this video to almost every team that I work with, and one of the constructs that he speaks to is the notion of, rather than within the team, rather than competing against the people on your team, you're competing with them. And if we see this as me competing with you, that means both of us, if you're going to run a race, you're probably going to run faster if you got somebody running alongside you than running by yourself. And so this notion of like, I want you to push me. I want us to both do hard things, because then we both get better at that. And while I appreciate that there are finite resources and not everybody's going to get the promotion if they all work hard, the reality is that if we see the people that are within our competitive cauldron, within our team, within our sales force, or whatever we're talking about, if we see those people as additive to my getting better and I'm additive to their getting better, right? Rises the tide of all boats, and effectively I'm becoming better because that person's trying to kick my ass a little bit every day, and that helps me be better. So I really try to promote the notion of within teams, within sales teams, within whatever we're talking about, really try to promote the notion of, stay in your own lane, focus on your own development, and be appreciative of the people that are alongside you, pushing you and trying to steal your lunch money. Be grateful for that, because it makes you do more difficult things, makes you learn how to manage those difficult situations in a way that's going to help you be better.
Jeff, you've been doing this for 40 years. You have an elite and secret client list, and I'm positive that you're continually striving to improve. When you're working with clients and evaluating your own process, what does your personal debrief look like, and what are you doing to continue to grow?
Well, what I do to continue to grow, I'll work backwards from your questions. What I do to continue to grow is I read a lot. I'm accessing, I don't really read anything sadly, I don't read anything other than what's in my domain of mental training, or, sports psychology, or philosophy, or, a lot of things around the notion of mentality. So I spend a lot of time doing that. I also feel like I do a good job of being very intentional of, my whole mantra, the name of my book is One Day Better. I work hard to practice what I preach, and I'm very intentional about, at the end of the day, being clear about something that I learned. So I'm seeking knowledge. I'm seeking improvement every single day through the interactions that I'm having with the athletes and coaches and teams with whom I work. So I learn something every day, and I'm very intentional about doing that. And partly how I measure, I would say largely how I measure success or not, is almost entirely through the feedback I'm getting from my athletes and from my teams, and not necessarily just outcome feedback, because not everybody gets to the top of the podium every day, and not everybody wins every game that they play, but the anecdotal feedback that I get about the value that the athletes and coaches get from having a forum in which they can gain more insight, or they can bounce ideas off somebody who's reasonably non-judgmental. what I do know is at the end of the day that I helped somebody. And for me, that's honestly the reason why I do what I do for a living, at the risk of sounding like Mother Teresa. I'm not trying to be that, but it's the reason why I wrote the book. I wrote the book. I do what I do because I have a pull towards being helpful. And if people feel things in the book are helpful, then the book was a success to me. If at the end of my day, the work that I did, there is someone who felt like what I did was additive in their life experience, then I feel like I've had a good day at work. So it's a bit nebulous. It's not data driven. But that's what's sustained me for all these years.
Is there any question that you like to ask yourself following doing your job to evaluate your performance, or that you ask athletes to ask themselves?
I'm back to the same question of, is what I'm doing working? Like, I think the question for me always is like, in what ways was today or this session or this interaction or whatever, in what ways was this incrementally beneficial? And sometimes it's incrementally beneficial because it sucked and it didn't go very well, but I learned something that I can apply. And so while it may be a painful, incrementally beneficial for future use, it may be painful for today, but I do a fair amount of self-exploration on a pretty consistent basis around, hey, was that, how could I have messaged that differently, or was that the optimal way to do that? I'm constantly searching. Again, I try to practice what I preach. I'm constantly searching to squeeze that one last drop out of something, to be a little bit better next time I'm interacting in that sort of situation. And I hold that mirror up in front of the athletes with whom I work. And okay, hey, what worked today? What things did you like? What things did you not like? Were there areas of confusion? I want to get clarity, that they got clarity, and that they have some takeaway. And for me, I feel some level of professional satisfaction if the takeaway is that they got something as intended and they intend to then apply it. Then I feel like we're making progress.
I'm really enjoying Jeff's book, One Day Better. Check it out wherever you get your books. And you can learn more about Jeff and the book at 80/20 Books on Instagram. Scripted and Robotic is out. Real is in. The communication landscape has changed. And yesterday's media training just doesn't work. That's why I started One Real Voice, to provide strategic guidance, coaching, and narrative development that senior leaders need to thrive in the dynamic, open-ended communication formats that are now mission critical for their roles. I'm currently at capacity, but if you're ready to be great, DM me at HardwayPod or email me at hello@onerealvoice.com. And if something opens up, we can chat. Crypto curious, with over $1 trillion in transactions to date, blockchain.com is your trusted partner on your crypto journey. And thank you to Lauf, my bike sponsor. They're the Apple of bike design, and they make elegant products that just work better than everything else, and they're a lot of fun to ride. You can find me at HardwayPod on Instagram. If you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe. Share this show with a friend who you think would enjoy doing hard things, because they're more fun. And you know what? You might become even better friends if you do them together. Until next time, have fun.